because the true cost of climate change can really only be calculated when you consider the health impacts, not just in this country, but globally, and they are massive. And as you just alluded, because the climate is changing, where we live, where we individually live, the risk is changing very rapidly. And so I think what we assume to be the way it's always been isn't always the case. And we see that more and more.
Hello, and welcome to this special episode of the REIT Report, part of our 2025 Building Resilience series, which is covering the ways in which the commercial real estate industry is focused on investing for the long term. Over 3 mini-series throughout the year, we'll discuss with industry experts some of the challenges facing communities across the country and how REITs are part of the solution, driving out opportunities for economic growth today and in the future. I'm Jessica Long, NAREIT Senior Vice President for Environmental Stewardship and Sustainability. This episode is part of our first series, where we will discuss some of the key issues facing REITs that are on the front line in addressing the increasing complexity of physical risk in the built environment. Buildings must not only be resilient to the increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters, but also be prepared and proactive to maintain the comfort and safety of building occupants and connected communities. Many stakeholders depend on REIT-owned properties to shelter their homes, businesses, provide essential services like groceries, medical care, and logistics, provide places for learning, recreation, and travel that power local communities, and provide the digital infrastructure that connects everything we do. The need for resilience is clear. However, quantifying the financial benefits of resilience is challenging. REIT shareholders, banks, insurance companies, and bondholders and individuals are all invested in buildings and communities across the country. They depend on financial performance metrics, credit ratings, and increasingly on climate risk data to make decisions about allocating capital and valuing real estate assets and portfolios. In this episode, we are going to talk about the human impacts of climate and natural disasters with Joanna Frank, founder, CEO, and president of Center of Active Design and Active Design Advisors, where she advances design and development practices that foster healthy and engaged communities. The Center for Active Design operates Fitwel, a building certification that focuses on building design and operational strategies that positively impact occupant health and productivity. Prior to launching CfAD, Joanna worked for the City of New York during the Bloomberg administration as the Director of Active Design and Director of the New York City Fresh program. And before working for the city, she was a partner at Bright City Development, responsible for the development of mixed-use residential buildings using sustainable design criteria. Welcome, Joanna. So happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Jessica. Great to be here.
So can you start out by giving a little bit of the history behind the start of Fitwel and the Center for Active Design, starting with your work in the city of New York?
Yeah, absolutely. So it did all start with New York City. It started with Michael Bloomberg, which I think everybody knows Michael's reputation, and that is really a data-driven approach to everything. So as the mayor of New York, he brought that lens to how to run a city. And the work of active design really started by how do we ensure that New York City is competing on the global stage with other world-class cities. So how do we differentiate New York City when it comes to London or Singapore or Paris? And the reason that we need to do that is to attract talent into New York in order to attract investment into New York. So this is, 15 years ago, 20 years ago at this point, New York wasn't the hub of the tech industry that it has today. And a lot of that was very much driven by attracting talent. So if that was the motivation, how do we establish and set New York City apart on that global stage? And what we heard by going out to the talent and the investors that we were looking to attract was that quality of life and having a building and a built environment for New York City that really supported a quality of life was how we were going to attract talent. I don't know for those of you who know New York City of 20 years ago, but it was a car-centric place. There were 4 to 6 lanes on some of the avenues. You actually literally had to jog across the street to cross within the time that the light allowed for. So heaven forbid if you were in any way slow crossing the light, you'd get stuck in the median if you were lucky, if there was a median. So it was not a people-centric place. It was a car-centric place. And so what we really looked at with the active design guidelines was how can we use the evidence base, the data, to translate that into the tangible strategies we can use to invest in New York City, to make it a more walkable place, to make neighborhoods really people-centric, to create those bike lanes and sidewalk cafes that really emulate maybe some European cities, because this is what people wanted. People want to be able to interact with one another. They want to sit on the street and watch the world go by, having a great cup of coffee. They want to be able to cycle to work or cycle to the park. They want great parks. They want investment in parks. Like, these are all the things that people were telling us that they wanted. And by investing in those aspects of the city, using the active design guidelines as the guide, as the evidence-based guide as to how to establish that, we were able to attract talent, investment. The streets that had those improvements very quickly saw an increase in their rent. They saw an increase in sales if they were retail business. So there was a direct correlation to short-term economic benefit. And then I think we see that long-term economic benefit that New York was able to establish itself on the global stage as somewhere that really prioritizes the people and the quality of life of those people. And that is what we do today. That's exactly the same as what we do today. We translate the global public health research, we translate that economic data around where the demand drivers are into practical strategies that can be used for any asset type. Whether you're building an entire master plan community from scratch, whether it's a small urban infill building, whether it's a Class A office space, Class C office space, it doesn't matter. Responding to the demand of the occupants and the people that you're looking to serve is going to drive financial performance for your building. And really understanding that and where to put that investment is critical in any competitive marketplace, wherever you're working.
Yeah, I love that story because honestly, I think looking at change in the rearview mirror shows you that it was a much different city and intentional steps were made. And now it's almost unbelievable to imagine the city as you described it, where you don't have this kind of pedestrian friendly environment and people really just enjoying the outside in New York City. And I love that. And I spent a bunch of time up in New York the past couple weeks and saw a lot of colleagues and got to just really enjoy that way of life. And I think it really has become a way of life. And so when you think about how hard it is to imagine a future that looks different and then take the steps to make that a reality. And I think bringing it back to climate, it's very hard to imagine a very different world, a very different climate in the areas where we've grown up, our families have been for many years in some cases, and saying it's not going to be the way it was and it's going to be different and making those changes to adapt. And so I think a lot of people see health as a social issue. The people focused, it's obviously a people focused element, and climate as more of the environmental side. But I think in the real world, we know that it's not either or, it's really both. And the increased risk of severe weather and extreme climate conditions is impacting both the physical building and the people that occupy those buildings and the people in the communities. So can you just talk a little bit about, in your work in this space, the connections with climate and how you see those kind of core public health elements of addressing climate change in communities?
Yes, it is an and these days. So we, as experts in the built environment, as owners of real estate, we have to do two things. We have to continue to reduce the drivers of climate change, so the greenhouse gases, and we have to accept that our climate has changed, and we can go into any number of stats that will tell you that it has changed at this point and it will continue to change. How do we use our built environment, our buildings, our neighborhoods, design, the way we're operating them, to create an environment that is resilient and is able, therefore, to foster that quality of life and safety for the residents? So we have to do both. We have to continue to reduce greenhouse gases at the same time as use our built environment for resilience. This was first, I think, brought to the public stage in a really public way at COP28, which is now like 2 years ago, where there was an entire day about health, because the true cost of climate change can really only be calculated when you consider the health impacts, not just in this country, but globally, and they are massive. And as you just alluded, because the climate is changing, where we live, where we individually live, the risk is changing very rapidly. And so I think what we assume to be the way it's always been isn't always the case. And we see that more and more. There's a stat here that in the 15 years up to 2015, 90 million people, 90 million more people started living in a flood zone. And that isn't because necessarily they moved into a flood zone, it's that the flood zones increased. So you now have 90 million people who are at a greater risk of flood than they were 15 years prior to that. And so I think you can see that across any number of these factors that climate change is affecting. We see heat. Obviously, heat is affecting more and more people. We're getting more extreme heat for longer periods of time. And so that is also changing the living conditions. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean a huge amount for a building. Like bricks don't really, do they care if it's 90 degrees or 100 degrees? I don't think so, right? You're not going to see a physical failure of a structure because of it being 100 degrees. But humans do not thrive at 100 degrees, especially if it's very humid. It has major impacts on health. It affects the overall life expectancy. It affects hospitalization rates. It affects mental health, which also in turn affects your quality of life as well as your overall life expectancy. So these things have very real impacts on people's health. And the built environment is there to protect humans, right? We are not building buildings for fun. We're building it for people. And how do we use our buildings to maintain that quality of life of people is going to be the challenge of the next 30 years. And some folks are going to get it right, and some folks are not going to get it right. But the demand is already there across all asset types. We see on the office side, the return to office, there's a lot of emphasis on having office spaces that are really designed for social interaction, that have maybe great food, which is very important. Do not dismiss it, real estate industry. Food has a big impact on the value of your assets and your occupancy rates. In order to entice people back to the office, you have to create an environment that is people-centric. That is how they're going to get folks to come back. We're seeing it on the industrial side, that you can really address some of the turnover issues with an industrial tenant by really looking at the physical quality of the building and the light and the air, sound, access to nature, etc. And then on the residential side, very strong consumer demand for health, quality of life, a willingness to still pay more for it. That's going to flip really quickly and become a risk if you aren't able to demonstrate how you're supporting quality of life for your residents.
Yeah, I think this idea of quality of life is so important because I think when we think about the extreme case of the natural disaster where you really had this hard hit, you've lost your possessions, potentially lives have been lost. Those are going to increase, but they're not touching everybody. It always feels like it's maybe the next town over or it's the neighbor's house or that's not going to happen to us. And we've been talking to folks in the insurance industry that are that backstop against that worst case scenario. The big event, the catastrophic event is what is contemplated. Again, maybe not fully in our system yet, but at least contemplated. I think what we're talking about now is some of these risks that are not fully quantified and contemplated in the system, that comfort. If you talk to any property manager and building engineer, right? Hot and cold calls. When you said people coming back to the office, it was one of the first things that I thought is maintaining the building temperature, right, is going to become more difficult. And the investment to make that better, right? It's not, you don't see it. You feel it in the comfort or the lack of discomfort. And so you go back to, even with those extreme events, it's the avoided cost. It's preventing the repair and maintenance or the disaster from happening. And in this space, it's similar, right? It's the comfort means the lack of discomfort, but you don't always get credit for that from the end user. And that is a slow burn instead of a big hit, right? The comfort slowly is eroded as the temperature gets hotter or the equipment starts to degrade because it's being overused in those extreme situations. And so how do we bring these two conversations together for the building owner who's making decisions every day about how to manage the building, what to invest in, to understand, again, these long-term risks and how they can make smart investments and then communicate it to the folks that are benefiting from it, who, again, are not going to see the new insulation or the new HVAC system, but they're going to feel it.
Yeah, no. So I think we go back to the data. So the way that we can all understand this is really correlating it to those value metrics that real estate really runs on. Like, how do we show the impact on various different measures of return on investment? How can we show that having a high quality interior that you can talk about with specificity to tenants and potential tenants, how is it affecting your lease up rate? How is it affecting the retention of your tenants? How are you using that to differentiate you as a landlord when it comes to your marketing, or when it comes to then who you're looking to, the investment pool that you're looking to attract? So I think really being able to translate the health research, the impact on whether demand is like, so how are you using that to marry to demand in your market, regardless of which asset type that you're working with? And then in turn, how do we translate that into dollars and cents or pounds sterling or whichever economy you're working in? Because it does exist. So I have great stats, and we've done this work already, by the way, so you don't need to do it. We've just translated the economic evidence around the Fitwel strategies. We can substantiate the financial impact of about 50 of 150 of the strategies that are in the Fitwel standard. So we don't have this for every strategy, but we have solid economic information for about 50. So that's a really good start. So I can give you some specifics. When you're looking at wildfire, you have that moment of risk of the wildfire, and that obviously has a great impact on the immediately affected properties and people. But the longer term and the more expensive impact is actually on the air quality, and it's a far larger risk. Obviously, it spreads out to a far larger amount. I have numbers here around that over 10 years, wildfire pollution is actually accounted for about $600 billion of cost because of the need to have high levels of filtration. And that costs more money to pull the air through because of the particulate matters. The particulates specifically from wildfires are associated with a huge number of deaths as well. So yes, you have that immediate trauma of the fire, but the increase in particulate matter that is specific to wildfire is having a long-term rate on respiration rate, on risks associated with pollution risks. So those are your short and your longer term health risks and financial risks. We've talked about heat a lot. This was an area that we as real estate folks can really affect, because the building material choices that we use, the color of our buildings, the amount of vegetation we have, for example, can really actually mitigate heat island effect. So we know that obviously buildings and built up areas are hotter than natural vegetation areas. So how do we use buildings to mitigate that? And I think where we can see some really strong evidence is that for every degree that you can cool your building using low colored, like light colored roofs, or having green roofs, for example, having a green roof can actually reduce the temperature of the building by about 40 degrees, which is massive. Yes, that's the actual building. And then the air temperature is about 5 degrees for air temperature. Every degree that you can cool the air temperature around your building is associated with a $50 increase in value, in rent premium for that building, and $1,000 of energy cost. So there you have both an impact on your ROI as well as an impact on your operating costs, which if you're owning the building, you can benefit from that directly. If it's a residential property, that's obviously something that you can then pass on, or you can advertise as a saving to your residential tenants or occupants. So that's, I think, where you start to see, okay, so having that lower air temperature is going to reduce hospitalization rates. It's going to be much better for the health of the people in the immediate surroundings of that building, and it has that financial benefit. And being able to connect all of those points together, that's what we need to do for each of these areas, each of these strategies, so that we can find messaging and really talk about this in a way that's going to resonate with the different stakeholders. Because if I'm living in the building, then I want a different message than if I own the building or if I'm investing in the building. And so to be able to make that value statement for each of our different stakeholders is essential, and we can do it. The information exists for many of these strategies.
I wish some of these stats were kind of more out there in the industry, right? We're not talking about enough how the just massive impact. And I can go back to my early sustainability days, up on the roof, taking pictures of the color of the roof to document for my building certifications, and really just thinking about where we didn't have that, the small change that it took to paint the roof or get the lighter stones to sprinkle on the roof, and those metrics behind those strategies really building over time. And I think that's one of the things that we know a lot more now than we did then 15 years ago, when many sustainability strategies were emerging tools and concepts. Now we have a lot more data that shows that it does work and it does have financial value. I was thinking about the kind of really so that health impacts of the wildfires and air quality, and really thinking about the public health element and that cost to the community. I think that again is an underappreciated piece where the building owner is making decisions about how to invest in capital in the building, what programs and what makes sense to do from an operational perspective. And really that public health benefit, the greater community being more resilient by being healthier, and the cost to the healthcare system, to the cities and the country who's funding a lot of the healthcare.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think social resilience can still be quantified down to the asset value. So I think, like, just for everybody listening to this, when we're talking about value, we are associating it with the asset value. So yes, there is definitely a value to society, but as real estate developers, how are we quantifying that? How are we justifying that investment for an individual building or an individual asset? And we can make that argument. We can connect those dots, which I think is important. It's very important that we can really articulate the value proposition for all of these different stakeholders. We were talking about trees earlier, chatting about Michael Bloomberg, because the Active Design Guidelines, Michael Bloomberg specifically, personally, very invested in trees, street trees. And street trees are fascinating. I think one day that's what I'm going to do, is just going to go around and plant street trees, because there really is, to me, no downside. So street trees is great because we can think about this as a very tangible thing anybody can do, right? Anybody who owns property can presumably plant street trees. I immediately think of a reason that you can't if there's a subway underneath, for example. But anyway, never mind. Having developed a site with a subway underneath, I remember this challenge. But for every street tree that we have actually reduces the air temperature by about 3 degrees, which is really a lot. So every street tree is making an impact. The more street trees you have, the greater the canopy, the greater the overall impact that has, obviously. But it is a straight line correlation. More trees, lower temperature, very good. So that's just the kind of the temperature. And obviously that is affecting the whole neighborhood. That's affecting all of the people who are living within that area who are using those streets. But it's doing more than that. Yes, it's affecting the air temperature, but it's also affecting mental health, because us seeing those trees and the greenery is actually having a positive impact on anybody who sees it. And it's also strengthening social bonds as well, and social resilience. And that may sound very fluffy, but social resilience is that feeling you get, oh, this is my neighborhood, this is where I live. And that is it's a very powerful feeling. And when you're developing, especially new communities, it's actually hard to replicate. How do we take down each of those elements and understand individually how to put them back together again to create community? Because people are seeking community. People will pay more for a neighborhood that has a neighborhood feel, or feels like a community, or feels like a neighborhood where I will know my neighbors. These are all the ways that we talk about that feeling. But using the evidence base, we can really break that down into the individual strategies that, when you put them together, actually enhances levels of trust, for example. So a well-maintained tree, well-maintained greenery is going to have about a 10% increase on trust between neighbors. If you trust your neighbor, you're more likely to walk down the street. You're more likely to say hello to your neighbor. That simple little social interaction is going to build social bonds, is going to really start that cycle of enhancing our social interaction, which helps to mitigate social isolation. Social isolation has a similar impact on your life expectancy as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So this is not touchy-feely, oh, how do you quantify this? This is very real. Social isolation has a very real impact on life expectancy. And we know how to create a built environment that can foster those social interactions. And people want it. People are willing to pay more for neighborhoods that have that feel. So we see this is where consumer demand is really, certainly on the residential side, driving this quality of life, creating spaces that really enhance the quality of life, that have that feeling, that make you feel safe, like that make you feel safe can all also be broken down into individual strategies as far as being able to see across spaces and lighting and all of these things. So I think demystifying all of the different elements of how to put together real estate that actually is enhanced for people has been the work we've done for the last 15 years. And we see it once again, it's always in demand. And I think at the moment, the demand for health is growing even stronger because it's something that is tangible to individuals. It's something people are demanding. And it makes sense with all of these other pieces that are in flux, maybe, and changing and feeling a little bit outside of people's control. Understanding the individual elements that they can actually look for to feel safe and protect their quality of life is something that is still very valuable in the market, and I think always will be.
That's exactly what I was thinking, is that people want to feel a sense of control. And if there's something they want to have control over, it's their own physical well-being and safety. And so I think that is super important, and important for building owners, communities, municipalities, cities to really understand. And I think really bringing these connections together, getting folks to really see the value of partnering and appreciate the value of some of the things that are happening in the built environment, where real estate owners are doing things for the social good, with that kind of return on investment coming from stronger communities, more resilient communities. It's paying back, but it takes time and understanding and really that connection. And I think bringing it back to where I started, a lot of people are thinking about climate from the physical sense and the environmental sense. And I think the more connections we can make to the people and the public health and the community resilience, the further we get in this conversation, because we all are in it together and we want to work together to build those strong relationships that result in really thriving communities, which is what we're all looking for. I think it's what investors are out there looking for, and it's what building owners and REITs are really looking to create in their day-to-day work. And it's a lot of the reason why I'm so fulfilled through my career in real estate, because I really do believe that I've been part of some amazing projects, and talking to amazing people who really are doing this work and thinking about it scientifically and really systematically, and making those changes. And the changes we've seen over the past 15 years, I think, are going to be nothing compared to the change that we see over the next 15, and the work that we can do from here.
I think that future-proofing piece is where I see real estate really thinking right now. Yes, we understand where the risks are today, the kind of immediate risks, but what does this mean for the evolving risk? What does it mean for the physical risk? And then also, what does it mean as far as demand is concerned? Because so much of the value of real estate is tied up in responding to demand from your tenants or your residents. That is fundamental to the value of real estate. If you aren't able to meet the demand in the marketplace, you are going to have a stranded asset. So if that asset has too high a flood risk and nobody's willing to tolerate that level of risk, that impact on the value of your asset is going to happen way before the actual flooding of that property. The risk itself is what's going to impact the demand or the ability to rent out or to lease out that space. So I think you have to understand hand in hand where the demand is and risk tolerance is and what people are looking for, at the same time as the physical attributes of the assets that you own or you're looking to invest in. And it's being able to marry those two things and kind of project that out forwards that is going to really, I think, inform which real estate continues to be successful, which cities continue to be successful, which typologies even continue to be successful. We had a wobble there with office, but I think what's interesting on the office side is that demand, especially from the youngest workforce, is to be in person again. They want the social interaction with their peers. They want an office environment that is supporting them socially, right? This has nothing to do with getting the work done. The reason that the return to office will succeed is because the people, the employees, want to be with one another. And that's a human connection, right? We call that health. It's the human condition. We are social creatures. So I think understanding that demand and how that demand is continuing to evolve is a very critical piece in understanding where the value of real estate will continue to evolve as well when it comes from that people side of the demand side. And we look back at history, we always see that kind of the value of real estate is always a reflection of society's needs and society's priorities. I often start when I'm speaking about this with a castle on top of a hill. So my ancestors were from Scotland and England and fighting one another, and the most valuable real estate was on the top of a hill, preferably with a big wall around it, because that is what you needed at the time. You needed safety, you needed a defensible space. Today, we have different needs depending on where you're living, but the human need is really driving that demand. So we still want safety. We still want security. Today, that means not being somewhere that is mitigating against flood risk and fire and all of those kind of. And then the security piece, I'd say, is around, can I afford to live in this house? Can I afford to heat it? Can I afford to cool it? Can I afford to maintain that indoor environment where my family can thrive? These are the kind of questions that people have for themselves. And these are the kind of questions that will drive answers that real estate will provide. And those are the buildings, right? There will always be buildings. If there are people, there will be buildings. Which buildings are going to be successful in the next 10, 20 years? It's the ones that really respond to that demand, that evolving demand from people. To me, that's the kind of the future for real estate. And it is the past as well. So nothing really changes, but our response is going to change.
I think, anybody who works in real estate, it operates on a cycle. And we know that. And we've seen some recent cycles with retail and industrial and now office, as you mentioned, and that those cycles continue. And it's over the long term and short term. And it will continue to be. And that is why real estate, again, is such a exciting industry to be a part of, because you're out there making decisions and making those projections about what is going to endure over the long term and investing in the infrastructure of tomorrow.
I mean, on the future piece, I think some of the areas that we look at, like on the stats and the demand side, just so folks know where this is coming from, we are very much looking at the students today. So there's a lot of research around what today's students, so the kind of 18 to 21, 22-year-olds, what they value, what they're looking for when it comes to student accommodation, which is in and of itself obviously a thriving asset type. But what they are demanding on willing to pay for is a very good indication to the rest of the real estate industry about what the next generation, who will be our future renters, our future homeowners, and our future workforce, what they value. And this is a generation that has been brought up with climate change being a constant throughout their lives and COVID being a very critical moment in their lives, and one obviously that nobody's going to forget it, but for them it was during their formative years. And this is also a generation that is keenly aware of their mental health, and their mental health, unfortunately, is pretty much statistically the worst of any generation. And so they are demanding currently student housing that is environmentally friendly, that is health promoting, that is specifically catering to fostering their mental health and positive mental health, creating areas to be social. They are not that interested in amenities and shiny things. They want good sound insulation and good thermal comfort. These are the attributes that they are saying they are looking for when it comes to student housing. So if I was still a developer today, I would be paying very close attention to what the students are looking at today as a very good indication of where the rest of real estate needs to be going in the future as this generation becomes the decision makers.
I think that's good advice. And I think that this discussion was amazing in really trying to make those connections and understanding how REITs are thinking about this issue. I'm just so excited about the work that I see happening in this space, our members that are working with you and Fitwel and other groups to really kind of advance this discussion and put these strategies into action, do the work to life, bring the strategies to life through the data and communicate those stories. So it's such a pleasure working with you and your team and knowing you and seeing all of the things that you're doing, how it's really just moved the conversation forward. And now I see this next phase of really accelerating the discussion and bringing these conversations that are happening in the sustainability space together.
Thank you, Jessica. Great to talk to you too.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more about what is happening across the REIT industry, you can subscribe to the REIT Report or leave a review wherever you access your podcasts. If you're interested in learning more about REIT sustainability, check out nareit.com sustainability, where we highlight our efforts across the REIT industry to deliver strategic value through sustainability in the built environment.